since it is June, which is LGBT Pride Month, an accusation that gets thrown around quite a bit is the idea of groomer. The idea that the LGBT or the allies or the whatever you want to call them are grooming children and making them, you might say, vulnerable to sexual predation or things of this nature. And they'll show footage on these like TikToks, these types of accounts that are given towards that proclivity of schools or something with rainbow flags and all this kind of stuff, where they're going to parades and they're going to festivals and stuff like that, where the children may not actually understand what is fully going on. And there is some validity to those criticisms. What I find interesting is the backlash to that criticism is often that the LGBT, the ally, the whoever will point out that Christians have been doing very similar things for a long time. That they might even use excerpted clips of things like Vacation Bible School or of Sunday school and prayer walks and events like this in which children are given Christian flags or posters with pro-life dialogue and messaging and things, when they probably don't fully understand what's going on either, and that's considered grooming as well. And there is some validity to that criticism, or you might say that counter criticism. And I think that is very important to note that if you don't like seeing Pride Month, or you don't like the annual, you might celebratory observances of LGBT, something that you as a conservative or as a Christian should probably note that almost all of it, the celebration aspects of it, were born in Christendom first. They've just been cheating off of the Christian's homework. That even if you were to ask in person, a lot of these LGBT identifying individuals now, that likelihood is a large portion, if not an overwhelming majority of them, were raised in conservative Christian contexts. They went to church every Sunday growing up as children, and that they won all the sword drills, they got all the little medals, they memorized the Bible verses, they went to VBS, they maybe even were baptized, they went to Bible camp, they went to all of those things that you're supposed to do. And as a result, they've observed these things, and they learned these practices from Christians. And I think what this does is it exposes the flawedness of that model, because of the fact that what often Christians will do is they'll take the verse in Proverbs that says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and in the end he will not turn away from it. And they will ignore the context of that's parent-child, not institution-anonymous child. And that it's an admonition that fathers are to take an active role in the discipleship of their own children, not to delegate that intrinsically necessary role to institutional professionals that went to seminary or whatever. And that I would be willing to file the charge, I guess you could say, that there would be zero problems of sexual exploitation in religious cultures if parents took their responsibility seriously, instead of delegating it to anonymous adult strangers that may or may not have passed a background check in the past, that you don't know anything about, you've probably never even met. So it's very important to note that they're doing the things Christians taught them were acceptable for adults to do with children. The only thing that has changed is the targeted messaging. And that, in fact, it's also notable that it doesn't work. That it's not a mistake that so many of these kids that grew up in those conservative Christian contexts, they grew up, They graduated from high school, they went off to college as freshmen, they come home visiting their parents for the holidays, and all of a sudden they're lesbian atheists or whatever. Because of the fact that it doesn't work the way that Christians have manipulated and falsely utilized that one out of context verse. That in fact, it might give them like a few memory verses here and there, but it doesn't instill a disciplined followership of Christ. It doesn't create a sensitive heart to the gospel. What in fact often it does is it creates a calloused heart instead, because these kids will go to church and they'll see the hypocrisy of the adults in their surroundings in those spaces, and then they'll see the hypocrisy of their parents at home and see that they don't want anything to do with it. So, and what's interesting is that in the Christian context, what they were doing, though, is that Christians were trying to capture the hearts and minds of the children in their sphere of influence. And whereas if that fails, the child can go on and be fairly healthy individuals nevertheless. The LGBT want something different. They don't want simply the hearts and minds. They also want the bodies of these children. That they want to be able to instill in them a desire for either hormonal or even just simply external visible changes, or even surgical ones that are not reversible. And so I would say that a lot of the criticisms against these LGBT movements is valid on the fact that those things, when they fully blossom, are not benign. The gender and the sexual and the biological transitioning aspects of them are not reversible, and the damage that it will eventually do is incalculable, sterilizing and potentially an entire generation of children. So it's very important to note that it is worse what the LGBT are doing, but they simply took what Christians have been practicing for now 2 or 3 consecutive generations and have simply taken it to the logical extreme with their own personal ideology. So what should Christians do in response to that? Number 1, the focus needs to be taken off of children and put back onto parents. We have to stop, as Christian leaders, we have to stop trying to surrogate parent their children for them. And I understand the desire, often it is well intended to try and offset the fatherless culture that we live in and try to support the single mothers that live in our context, to try and just take the burden off of them, thinking that that's helpful. It's not. In fact, what we need to do is increase the pressure and heat on men to bear the weight of their responsibility in their own home. That 1 Corinthians chapter 16 says that we are to act like men, that we are to be strong and courageous, and that we are to do everything in love. That's the commission towards men, and it's all throughout Scripture that we are to do this. And that when we allow men to not do those very things, to get lazy, to slack off at home with their own children, and slack off at church with the institutional needs, the teachings, and the modeling of godly behavior, when we allow men to slack off, the wives and children are just a short distance in the wings to start doing the same thing. And the worst possible aspect of this is the matrilineal overcompensation, which, if you don't know what that means, matrilineal is a culture in which men are present, but women are expected to do overwhelmingly more of the labor. So, for example, that the greeting team at your church is likely 60 to 75% women. The ones that are putting out the coffee and getting the donuts ready and going to pick them up and vacuuming the floors and getting the chairs all straight and everything. It's probably overwhelmingly women involved in those things, because of the fact that men are not given a gospel-driven motivation to get themselves involved. In fact, a lot of churches will do the opposite of just, you've been working hard, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, take the day off, essentially, the weekend off, and just put yourself in the recliner, put your feet up, you've done your duty, and you haven't. You have not. If you are a man, you need to be on at all times. And to which some would say, that's not fair. And to which I would say, life's not fair. Get over it. Man up. To which someone would say that, why should I? That's exhausting. And to which I would say in direct response to that, you are supposed to be tired. We live in a culture that believes that you're supposed to be fresh all the time. That's ridiculous. You are given the gift of enough strength by God for today alone. You're not even promised tomorrow. You could die in your sleep for all you know, and all the energy that you've been supposedly saving up for retirement or your golden age or whatever is going to have gone to waste. You must see today is the gift that it is and capture it. That's what being courageous is. That's what acting like a man is. If you don't take that seriously, what will happen is your children will grow up and resent you for your lack of investment in them. Whether you divorced their parents, their mother or not, whether you took them on vacation or not, whether you bought them the BMW in their 16th or not. None of those things matter in the grand scheme of things if you weren't involved in intentionally seeking for windows to preach the gospel and model the gospel every single day, so that when your head hits the pillow, you're ready to sleep. Wonder why you can't sleep at night? It's probably because you're trying to save too much for tomorrow and not giving it all today. So, give more. And when it comes down to it, or that you feel like that it's not 50-50 in your relationship, give more. If you feel like that it's like 60-40 and that you're doing more than she is, give more to the point where it's 100% on your side. And no matter what she has to offer, give more. That's what men do. Christ, in fact, tells us that in the book of Hebrews, we're told that we are to look to Jesus as our model. Chapter 12, verse 1 through 4. We are to look to Jesus as our model, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame. The joy set before him is the family that he would receive, that he's the firstborn of many brethren. Your joy set before you is your family. If you believe that your family is the cross that you have to endure, you've got it backwards. You're wrong. It's not like that. The joy set before you is the family that you have been given. They're a gift. Do not squander it.